Final Fantasy XII is an amazing experience, but oh my god, does this game get me going. I don't want to be a roided up gamer with all the undying rage of 1,000 men, but holy heck, does Final Fantasy XII really grind my gears. Now, you might be thinking, Matt,
what
do you hate about this game so much? Now, I don't hate the game, but let me just get out my list of grievances. Grind boss steals just monster kills for rare items. Get every concurrence to 100% the game's achievements. Kill the 2 hardest bosses in the game to get only part of the best weapon. To get the best weapon in the game, you need to not only kill the 2 hardest bosses, but you have to finish a completely unrelated fishing minigame, which requires you to go through a wild goose chase across the ends of the fucking earth to get a better fishing pole. On top of being an infuriating combo button pressing mess to complete. Breathe. Spend over 2 hours on a single boss that doesn't drop anything good, only after going through convoluted puzzles. Walk in and out of a door, going through loading screens every time, hundreds of times, for 1% spawn rate chest that drops the best shield in the game. Go in and out of a door more than hundreds of times to get a chest that spawns only 2% of the time, only drops an item 20% of the time, and requires you to wear a special item to get one of the best swords in the game that only has a possibility of coming out of the chest. Deal with Penelo. Start to a merchant hundreds of times to get an item that costs a ton of money and only makes certain types of creatures drop a pebble. Have fun with the combat system. Kill an entire enemy species in a single area that can respawn in hopes to spawn a rare creature, and then repeat the process to a varying degree of alteration to kill all 80 rare creatures and complete the bestiary. And finally, exist. Or you could do none of that and just play the regular game for the story, if you're a weirdo. Alright, now that I've gotten into the first minute of the video and already complained, let me make it clear that I simultaneously love and hate this game for many reasons. For starters, this game is a mess. The combat system can be boring, there isn't much challenge outside of the optional content, and it has a bunch of needlessly complicated hurdles that are thrown at the player at Mach fucking 10 and expects you to just figure it out. But on the other hand, Final Fantasy XII is still an amazing experience in most regards. For example, the story is pretty good, which is enhanced by the main cast that has some pretty good chemistry and voice acting. While at the same time, the overall story didn't throw me many curveballs or shock me in the ending. The world design and soundtrack carried the rest of the experience for me. So basically, I love Final Fantasy XII despite it being a bit of an obtuse mess. I went into Final Fantasy XII with the expectation that I was going to enjoy it. And while I did enjoy the game, I also didn't enjoy having my fingernails ripped off every 10 hours. The main reason I decided to play this game was because it holds a lot of childhood nostalgia for me personally, as I watched my dad play it a lot when I was a kid, and I still own that original PS2 copy. Despite owning this game on PS2, I chose to play the Zodiac Age Remaster instead, and I am immensely grateful that I did. While the original does have a non-rigid class system in opposition to the Zodiac Age makes a few minor gameplay adjustments, and most importantly has a fast-forward feature that makes the game immensely more enjoyable to play. This brings up the most glaring flaw of Final Fantasy XII, which is the combat system. For me, the combat system was tolerable up until the final stretch of the game. While it is slow, it isn't the absolute worst. The main problem with this game's combat system is that it usually doesn't require a lot of real-time player input. While it does allow for strategy with pre-made character behaviors that you can manage, late-game boss fights can get very boring when you're just waiting for your team to hit the enemy until it dies. But the fast-forward feature circumvents most of this tedium, which makes it a lot more enjoyable in the Zodiac Age than the original version. Thankfully, the remaster doesn't change a lot of the base game or its charm, so you're not sacrificing anything from the experience by not playing the original. But with all that out of the way, let me get into the main things that we're going to be covering from Final Fantasy XII, which are its visuals, story, world design, and music. And per usual, no major story spoilers, though there will be out of context spoilers and late game discussions. This game is old, so get in your blind experience while you still can. Also, I think it's important to mention that I never finished another Final Fantasy game before. I've played a small bit of the first game, Final Fantasy VIII, X-2, and fucking Tactics Advance, so keep in mind my opinion doesn't matter. Let me start off by saying that while Final Fantasy XII is not graphically impressive, it is still incredibly beautiful, be it in its map design, FMV cutscenes, or just everything. You know what? Throw everything in there. Final Fantasy XII is a fairly old game, and the remaster only really ups the resolution, so while there isn't a whole lot of graphic fidelity going on, you can still see a ton of love and detail put into the map designs and various character or enemy models. And as a proud supporter of the Itty Bitty Titty Committee, I can personally say that I'm able to find beauty in the smallest of things. You got places like the Cilica Wood, Iriut Village, and Gamolari Jungle that showcase a lush green natural atmosphere and really satisfy my need for beautiful ambient forest areas. There's places like Rabanastre and Arcades that in terms of the former really give off comfortable, dense, packed town vibes, and in terms of the latter really make me want to punch rich imperialist snobs. Finally, the Sultan Cave Palace and the Garam Scythe waterways are eerie and dense caverns that are fun to explore through. Each area is packed with detail and deep visual atmosphere that show how carefully crafted and thought out the level design is. Areas are accompanied by music that also greatly enhance the overall atmosphere and create an immersive world. For instance, you have Iriut Village that restricts the player from walking down certain paths, and yet you still have tons and tons of bridges, and even Vieira's walking on inaccessible locations that you'll never be able to reach, just to make it an immersive village. Not to mention the span of thousands of trees that go along with any forested area or the large expanses of water either in the dregs of caverns or the Fawn coastline. If I were to get into any of my favorite areas, it would have to be Iriut Village, of course, because I love video game forest levels. And actually, hold on, I need to make a video on that. What other great contenders are the grandiose Mount Ber Omnistes for its beautiful mountains and the pure awe of standing atop such a massively high area. The Garam Scythe waterway for its duality of being a mainline story area and later having many secrets to uncover. And I also like the Barheim Passage because of its beautiful underground expanse of water that glistens under dimly lit lanterns. Moving on from level design, you have the overall character and enemy design that further cements this game's aesthetic. Each main character in the game is uniquely stylized and incredibly ridiculous. I mean, seriously, just look at this guy. He's just begging to be shot in that chest cavity. God damn it! NPCs are not as unique looking, but at least some stand out, and the main point I'm making here is that they all look like they belong in the world they reside in. Except for that weird cat person. You only see one of them. What are they doing? Enemies follow this same rule too, as they're organically designed into their respective areas. There are certain races of enemies, but new ones are always introduced to emulate a vast world with realistic climate and geographical differences that are reflected on varied enemy design. I'd also like to point out how detailed some of the enemies or bosses can be, especially the late game ones that have gargantuan size and fill up entire arenas. Where Final Fantasy XII falls in graphical quality, it definitely shines in its attention to detail and careful design put into everything as small as shields and as massive as ancient dragons. Bosses are cool, character designs are memorable, and the overall atmospheric vibe of Final Fantasy XII persists throughout all of its varied locales, which creates an incredible interconnected world that's also prominent within the literal world design as well. Which brings us to...
There is a hunter's camp just beyond the Cilica Wood. The camp sits within Arcadia's borders, so Imperial patrols there should be sparse.
To fully encompass the scope of Final Fantasy XII's world design, it's important to take a look at the map. From this you can see how massive the scale of Ivalice is. Keep in mind that you pretty much go through all of these locations throughout the main storyline, and they're relatively large to traverse. Now this game is no Dark Souls or anything, but a fun quirk about the world design is the interconnectedness of some of the levels. You'll be wandering through the Dalmascan Westersan, then suddenly BAM! You're in the Zertinian Caverns, and oh god, you're level 10. What the fuck, is that a bird? But later on, when you're level 60 and completely bored of the game, you actually go back to the caverns and realize that it's the biggest hub spot that connect to 4 or 5 different areas altogether, and it's wacko crazy land that for some reason has level 80 dragons that tear you to shreds immediately. Point is, you have a good bit of areas that connect to the other areas in crazy ways you wouldn't have thought about early in the game. Nevertheless, Final Fantasy XII's world is designed in a cohesive way that makes it more immersive and fun to explore. You can't see many distant areas, most likely due to the original game's hardware limitations, and the Zodiac Age doesn't change any of that, but that doesn't take very much away from the game. It just makes it less like Dark Souls. Anyways, I think it's been long enough of me just talking about a game map, so I should move on to some of the game's mechanics. Final Fantasy XII is a weird, semi-real-time strategy RPG. I have absolutely no idea how to describe the combat system, as it implements such a strange combination of mechanics that I have never seen in another video game before. The combat revolves around you directing your party of heroes and charging up attacks on enemies over time. It's not entirely turn-based as attacks play out in real time, but it's not entirely real-time either because you can pause the game and give out specific directions, which causes anyone who tries to describe this combat system to have a fucking stroke. There are also Gambits, which are basically simplistic coding blocks that tell you or your teammates how to attack enemies or heal themselves, which streamlines the combat system to go from unbearably slow to a snail hopped up on cocaine pace. There's also a rudimentary looting system that is mostly overshadowed by how annoying it is to get the rarest items in this game. I mean, come on, man! Along with this, you have a license system that basically gives your characters classes and lets them unlock more skills as they kill more enemies. I like this system a lot because it makes levels less important, as license points are distributed to inactive party members and licenses offer far greater rewards than a simple level up. This license system also allows you to technically become an overpowered god before the first major area in the game, if you keep killing the most basic enemies. I'm being completely serious. There are some insane bastards out there who get to level 90 with Vaughn and Penelo at the start of the game. To put that in perspective, I barely got to level 90 when I 100%ed the game. Those are some crazy, crazy people. Speaking of crazy people, can we talk about whoever the hell designed the Hen Mines and Dracula Labs? Easily the least immersive areas in the game, purely because they have a ridiculous video gamey door system where you have to open one set of doors by closing another. It offers nothing but inconvenience to the player, and it's completely absurd to fathom this as an in-world setting. Like, who the fuck would actually design something that would be inconveniencing the lives of hundreds of workers literally every second? And if you wanted to focus on inconvenience, don't even get me started on the fishing minigame. I still have the burning rage. Final Fantasy XII doesn't have a lot of noteworthy mechanics that I feel like I need to talk about. Personally, the combat system didn't turn me off from the game, but if it's something you may not be into, there are many other great things about this game that carry the experience, such as the world building and lore that is enhanced by the smooth flow of interconnected Evilise.
Oh, quite a performance. Who are you? I play the leading man. Who else?
The overarching story of Final Fantasy is something I never really understood, mostly because I never really cared or, actually played any of the other games. But I don't think it matters much because I think they're all disconnected anyway. Regardless of whether or not all Final Fantasy games take part in a shared universe is irrelevant. But Final Fantasy XII gives off a sense of pre-established world that you're just dropped into. There's a lot of world building that goes on around the main characters, but you always experience the story around you rather than having everything outright explained. What I'm getting at is that Final Fantasy XII has well-established lore that eases the player in seamlessly. You're dropped into a war, experiencing it firsthand to better contextualize the actual starting point of the game. There are many pre-existing entities within the lore that are just straight up name-dropped, but completely unexplained. Like, friend, what the fuck is Mist? You've mentioned it like 50 times, but I have no idea what you're talking about. But if you look at all this world building, it makes perfect sense in the context of the game. Vaughn, the guy you've been playing as this entire time, dummy, has already lived in this world and knows all the wacko crazy shit that your big dumb baby brain doesn't know at first picking up the game. But the game gradually either lets the player figure it out themselves or slowly explains it through context and natural progression. The point is, this game's trouble. There are only a few points where the game dumps exposition onto you, but it's mostly to add flavor, and it's done through storybook segments that are written by a guy who you actually meet in the game and takes part in the story, which adds a whole layer of coolness, and these segments only exist near the beginning of the game. Personally, I didn't find these dialogue expositions to be awkward, much like the regular dialogue and cutscenes within the game. Now, you might think the writing is awkward at times to whatever dialogue sequence because Vaughn is a dummy idiot kid who doesn't realize that you shouldn't ask a 500-year-old Viera her age, but I personally didn't find any sequence in this game to be too awkward.
Nice fun.
And on top of that, Balthier's buttery smooth voice adds not only the greatest thing to bless this godforsaken earth, but makes cutscenes way more entertaining.
So, let them get too close to one of those conduits and they'll suck it dry. But don't worry, it'll give the energy back if you ask nicely. Sticking it with a sword helps too. Clock's ticking.
All of the voice cast in general is enjoyable and enriches the entire experience. There are a lot of cutscenes in this game that are well written and directed, usually placed between long dungeon levels. The game's cutscenes are not only entertaining, but also offer a lot of necessary story development and a nice break from the gameplay every now and then. For me, there are a few times that I had to take a break from Final Fantasy XII. Either I had been playing for over 20 hours in the past week, or I was just tired during that day. But this game can get grating at times due to its tedious combat mechanics. The story and characters help pace out the game and ease fatigue on the player's end. This game is long. Not like Persona 4 long and drawn out, but I would expect the normal story to take around 40 hours of gameplay. For me, it took roughly 70 hours to 100% the main story while completing every marked side quest, and there still could have been a few obscure side things I missed. Like one time a character in Pajibra said, "Oh my god, my child is missing!" And I was already tired from the dungeon exploring and I didn't care enough to look it up, so I just left his father to grieve over the possible loss of his child. It didn't help that this little shit of his other son sneered, "I know where the kid is, but I won't tell you, fuckhead." So I just told the game to go fuck itself and never came back. Generally though, the side quests in this game are going to be more fun than the actual main story stuff gameplay wise, with hunts and optional bosses being the most challenging fights you'll come across. However, this side content doesn't progress with any of the main story. It only offers a ton of side stories that don't have much substance to them, and it ends up making you over-leveled, which makes the main story stuff less fun and it's just a mess again. Overall though, I thought it was cool when some characters you help out during hunts come back to help you later, or one guy looking up to you as a hero for defeating tough monsters. Both things that help make this world more immersive and cohesive. I know I should have said some of this stuff in the gameplay segment earlier, but I'd fried my brain so hard in the ffXII fishing minigame Microwave that my script writing ability has significantly diminished, so it's going in story mode instead. But yeah, the lore of Final Fantasy XII is constantly building upon itself the more you adventure through Ivalice, which is also complemented by what we've talked about earlier, where the literal design of the world helps build upon that immersion even more. Isn't that neat? If I were to have to sell this game on one point, it would have to be the immersion, because the whole game is well thought out and complements itself through all of its different aspects. Now all of this is great, amazing, pretty cool when you get down to all of it, but one of Final Fantasy XII's defining features to me that is completely disconnected from everything else is its music. If there's one thing I love the most about video games, it's forest levels, but something I'm clearly very passionate about in general is music. Music in video games is incredibly special to me because it combines my two favorite things, but most importantly, video game music has the power to exponentially enhance the basic experience of a game, which is definitely the case for Final Fantasy XII. It is so hard to put into words how beautiful this game implements music and just how majestic it can be. You start up the game to hear this beautiful synthesized harp and choir that's a reimagining of Final Fantasy VII's title screen theme, only to hear the most orgasmic orchestral ensemble on a video game title screen you've ever known. Oh my vina! Not only is this title theme nostalgic for me, it also sets the tone of the entire journey perfectly, encapsulating the epic and grandiose scale of the game's adventure. If you move past the title screen, you can hear that the entirety of Final Fantasy XII's soundtrack is orchestral, and I feel like this enhances the grandiose feeling of your adventure greatly. Take a look at the game's boss battle theme, and I can guarantee you that it wouldn't sound nearly as intense without the dynamics of an orchestra. There are so many instruments firing off at once through the soundtrack, compiling into a masterful listening experience with each respective song. The soundtrack can range from intense or foreboding to calm and relaxing, along with other emotions. The entire soundtrack covers and enriches each story segment, fight, and area it's present in. I can only name one single time where the music has given off an unintended effect, which is during a really intense moment, but the music just comically cuts out and, well, Minor spoilers ahead.
Observe well, Asa. Watch and mark you, the suffering of one who must rule, yet lacks the power.
No. No, brother. I will not. Though I lack your power, I will still persist.
With Final Fantasy XII's soundtrack, you have royal themes like Rabanastre City's song, which was one of the few songs I remembered ever since I first saw this game, cause damn, this feels super unique and sets a good starting tone for the game. There are also ambient exploration tracks like in the Celica Wood, the Damascus Ester Sand, and the Garam Scythe Waterway. But if you were to look at any area track, you'd get the same thing. Each song fits its area well and gives off the right vibes to match the visuals, making it fun to explore and certain areas more memorable. Certain town themes like Ariad Village and Mount Bromnesis are relaxing, and in terms of the former, cozy and comfortable, and in terms of the latter, beautifully depressing. You've also got beautiful piano rolls that play during small cutscenes or other very short tracks that can perfectly capture an emotion, such as Separation with Penelo, which is absolutely gorgeous to listen to, but sadly short.
Okay.
That's what I wanted to hear. See you later.
Sorry, Penelo.
Personally, it's hard for me to choose a specific favorite out of the whole soundtrack, because there are so many songs that can fit different moods, and they're all amazing. Pretty much any song I put into the mix I made would be top tier on my list, but if I had to choose one specifically, it would have to be the track titled Abandoning Power. This track starts off with a beautiful soft piano, and it's incredibly relaxing and mystical through its stringed instrumentation and the subtle choir in some background parts. I don't fully remember when this plays. I'm pretty sure it's in Mount Bromnesis. It has been a while since I've heard it in-game, but it's perfect for that area, as it parallels the same depressing yet hopeful tones of the area. Final Fantasy XII's soundtrack is honestly one of the greatest I've heard, and speaks for the utility and wide genre of video game music. There's so many amazing soundtracks that I've heard that I won't get into during this video, but they're at the same level as Final Fantasy XII. And it's incredible to see so much beautiful music that's also completely different from each other. Back on track though, FF12's soundtrack is the cherry on top. In fact, several cherries, because goddamn, I think the soundtrack is honestly my favorite part of the game. Final Fantasy XII definitely has some very defining characteristics that all flow into each other incredibly well. While this interweaving aspect isn't something unique I've never seen in a game before, it's one of the best things you can do while designing a game. FF12 is a beautiful journey through an immersive fantasy world that continues to get better and better as you play the game. Not only by its growing interconnectedness that expands as you experience more, but also by its wonderful music that binds everything together beautifully.